The scent of decay filled the night air as I moved through the skeletal remains of downtown Detroit. 8 months since the world ended, and the once proud Motor City had become a graveyard of twisted metal and rotting flesh. But I had seen civilizations rise and fall for over 6 centuries. This was merely another Tuesday evening. My enhanced hearing picked up the shuffling footsteps before my eyes caught the movement. A cluster of the walking dead had cornered 3 survivors in what used to be a pharmacy. I observed from the shadows of a collapsed overpass, calculating. The humans were valuable. Young, healthy, their blood still untainted by the infection that had claimed so many others. Livestock, I reminded myself. Nothing more. The creatures that had once been human pressed against the pharmacy's barricaded entrance, their decomposing fingers clawing at wooden boards. Inside, I could hear rapid heartbeats, smell the copper tang of fear sweat mingling with adrenaline. Prime feeding conditions. In better times. Now these pathetic remnants of humanity represented something far more precious than a meal. They were my future. I dropped silently from the overpass, my boots making no sound as they touched the cracked asphalt. The infected didn't notice me. Their primitive senses focused entirely on the warm blood trapped inside the building. I moved among them like a ghost, my pale hands finding skulls and necks with surgical precision. Bones cracked, vertebrae separated. The undead collapsed without ceremony, their second death as unremarkable as their continued existence had been. Within minutes, the street fell silent except for the frantic whispers from inside the pharmacy. "Did you hear that?" A woman's voice, steady despite the circumstances. "Maybe they moved on," replied a younger man, hope bleeding through his words. I melted back into the shadows before they could peer outside. I had learned to be invisible, to be the mysterious force that cleared their path without explanation. Let them think it was luck, divine intervention, or simple fortune. The truth would only complicate things. I was about to continue my patrol when another scent caught my attention. Something that made my dead heart skip with recognition. Another vampire. My enhanced senses tracked the source. North, toward the ruins of the Renaissance Center. The signature was faint, weakened, but unmistakably vampiric. In 8 months of hunting through this wasteland, I had encountered no others of my kind. Most had simply vanished, their territorial bonds severed without explanation. Some, I suspected, had chosen to greet the dawn rather than face slow starvation. The journey across the city took me through familiar hunting grounds, past the abandoned Ford plant where I'd saved a family of 4 from a horde 3 weeks ago. Beyond the collapsed freeway where I'd eliminated 60 infected in a single night, protecting a convoy of survivors heading north. Each location held the memory of preservation, my efforts to maintain the dwindling human population. The Renaissance Center loomed ahead, its glass towers reflecting the pale moonlight. Most of the windows had been shattered, giving the structure the appearance of a mouth full of broken teeth. I scaled the exterior with inhuman grace, my fingers finding purchase on concrete ledges and steel frameworks. On the 32nd floor, I found her. She sat in what had once been an executive office, her back against floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the dead city below. Even weakened by hunger, she was breathtakingly beautiful. Dark hair cascading over pale shoulders, violet eyes that seemed to hold centuries of sorrow. Her designer dress, once elegant, now hung loose on her diminished frame. "I was wondering when you'd find me," she said without turning around. Her voice carried the refined accent of old European nobility. "I've been watching your conservation efforts." I stepped into the office, my footsteps careful and measured. "You've been here long?" 3 days. She finally looked at me, and I saw the hollow desperation I recognized in my own reflection. Waiting for the courage. Courage for what? She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. To watch the sunrise, of course. To end this gracefully rather than becoming some slavering beast, fighting over scraps of tainted blood. I studied her face, noting the aristocratic bone structure, the ancient wisdom behind those violet eyes. "You're old. Older than most." Elena Rosewood, created in 1743 by Lord Ambrose Blackthorne in the court of Versailles. She stood with fluid grace despite her weakened state. "And you're the infamous Victor Drake. Though I knew you by your true name long before you adopted modern aliases." The recognition was mutual. I had heard whispers of Elena throughout the centuries. The Pearl of Paris, they'd called her. A vampire of exceptional beauty and considerable power, rarely seen but widely respected among our kind. Lord Blackthorn, I inquired. Gone. The single word carried the weight of profound loss. The hunger took him 2 months ago. He simply stopped feeding, stopped fighting. One morning I found only ash in his signet ring. I understood. The bonds between creator and created ran deeper than human comprehension. To lose one's maker was to lose an anchor to immortal existence. And now you plan to follow him. Elena returned to the window, gazing out at the wasteland below. Look at them, Victor. Scurrying through the ruins like rats. We spent centuries as apex predators, and now we're reduced to shepherding our prey. Where's the dignity in that? There's dignity in survival. Is there? She turned to face me again. When was the last time you truly fed? When did you last feel the ecstasy of fresh, willing blood flowing down your throat? This existence we're clinging to, it's not life, it's merely delayed death. I had no answer because she was right. The last time I'd fed properly was 9 months ago, just before the infection spread beyond containment. A young artist in Brooklyn, seduced and drained with the practiced ease of centuries. Now that seemed like a lifetime ago. I've been tracking the others, Elena continued. Our communications network. Did you know that the Covenant of Madrid dissolved itself last month? All 7 members chose the dawn together. The Shanghai Conclave, gone. Even the ancient ones in Eastern Europe are reporting mass extinctions. The weight of her words settled over me like a shroud. I had suspected as much, but hearing confirmation made the reality inescapable. Then we are the last. Perhaps. Does that change anything for you? I moved to stand beside her at the window. Below, I could see the faint glow of campfires where human survivors huddled together for warmth and protection. My livestock, my responsibility. I need them alive, I said simply. Elena laughed, but there was hysteria at the edges. Still the pragmatist, even at the end of the world. Tell me, Victor, when the last human dies, when there's nothing left to preserve, what then? Will you finally admit that our time has passed? Before I could answer, the building shuddered. Somewhere below, glass shattered and metal groaned. The infected had found a way inside. Elena's eyes lit up with predatory hunger for the first time since I'd arrived. Shall we hunt together, one last time? I nodded, feeling my own dormant instincts awakening. Stay close. The building's structure is compromised. We moved through the darkened floors like deadly shadows, our supernatural senses guiding us toward the source of the disturbance. On the 20th floor, we found them, a massive horde that had broken through the lobby's barricades, drawn by some stimulus I couldn't identify. Then I heard it. Faint, but unmistakable. Human voices. Survivors had taken shelter in this building, probably thinking the height would provide safety. Floor 15, Elena whispered, her enhanced hearing confirming my suspicions. We had perhaps 10 minutes before the infected reached their prey. Elena and I exchanged a look of understanding and descended into the chaos. The next few minutes blurred into a symphony of violence. My claws tore through rotting flesh while Elena moved with dancer-like grace, her precise strikes separating heads from shoulders with artistic efficiency. We worked in perfect synchronization, 2 apex predators reclaiming our dominance over death itself. When silence finally returned to the building, we stood among dozens of truly dead corpses, our clothes torn and stained with blackened blood. I felt a momentary surge of satisfaction, the old thrill of the hunt, the primal joy of successful predation. But Elena was staring at her hands with revulsion. "Look at us," she whispered. "Reduced to scavenging among corpses. This is what we've become, Victor. This is what immortality looks like at the end of the world." Before I could respond, voices echoed from the stairwell above, the survivors, calling out in gratitude to their unknown saviors. Their relief was palpable, their joy at continued existence heartbreaking in its innocence. Elena walked to the window and stared out at the approaching dawn. The eastern horizon showed the faintest hint of gray. "I've made my decision," she said quietly. Tomorrow night, I watch the sunrise from the roof. The words hit me like a physical blow. In all my centuries, I had never felt loss quite like this. The knowledge that soon I would be truly, completely alone. Elena, please. She turned to me with a sad smile. Will you stay with me tonight? I don't want to spend my last evening in solitude. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. Above us, the survivors were already moving, probably planning to leave the building at first light. My responsibilities would continue. But tomorrow night, I would lose the only other being in the world who understood what it meant to be a monster trying to preserve beauty in a dying world. As we settled into the abandoned office to wait for dawn, I realized that Elena's choice might be wiser than my stubborn refusal to surrender. Perhaps some things were worth more than mere survival. Perhaps some endings were more dignified than others. The abandoned executive office became a sanctuary of shared solitude as Elena and I settled into chairs that had once commanded corporate empires. Outside, the first pale fingers of dawn crept across Detroit's horizon, forcing us to retreat from the windows. Elena had pulled heavy curtains across the glass, creating a cocoon of darkness that would protect us through the daylight hours. I studied her profile in the dim emergency lighting that still functioned sporadically throughout the building. Even weakened by hunger, Elena possessed an ethereal beauty that reminded me why vampires had inspired so many human legends. Her skin seemed to glow with its own luminescence, unmarked by the centuries she had endured. Tell me about Lord Blackthorn, I said, breaking the silence that had stretched between us for nearly an hour. Elena's violet eyes grew distant. Ambrose was magnificent, ancient even by our standards. He claimed to remember the fall of Rome, though he never spoke of it directly. When he found me dying of fever in Versailles, I was nothing. A courtier's daughter with more beauty than sense. She paused, her fingers tracing patterns on the dusty armrest. He gave me eternity, then spent decades teaching me how to use it, how to hunt without leaving traces, how to move through human society like a ghost, how to feed without destroying. The old ways, I murmured, understanding. Yes, one vampire creates one other, no more. We maintained balance for centuries because we understood restraint. Elena's voice carried bitter irony. Funny how the end of the world makes such wisdom irrelevant. I remembered my own maker, Count Vladislav Tepes, who had pulled me from a battlefield in medieval Wallachia. The transformation had been brutal, the education even more so. But the principles had remained constant across centuries. Secrecy, restraint, survival through careful preservation of our food source. When did you last feed properly? I asked. December 15th. A banker in Manhattan who worked late nights. He was kind, actually. Offered to share his coffee before I... Elena's expression darkened. That was 3 days before the first outbreak reports. I had no idea I was savoring my last real meal. My own last feeding seemed equally distant. The artist in Brooklyn, passionate, creative, alive in ways that made her blood sing with vitality. Now both our prey and our predators were reduced to this. Two monsters clinging to existence in a world that no longer supported our nature. I've been receiving transmissions, Elena said suddenly. Through the old networks. Would you like to hear them? Before I could respond, she rose and moved to a corner of the office where an antique radio sat among the remnants of corporate luxury. Her fingers worked across the dial with practiced precision, finding frequencies that existed far below normal human broadcasting ranges. Static filled the air, then a voice emerged. Weak, distorted, but unmistakably vampiric. London Coven reporting final status. Lord Ashworth chose the dawn 3 days ago. Lady Pemberton followed yesterday. I am Marcus, last of the bloodline. The humans here number perhaps 200, scattered across the city. I have done what I can to preserve them, but the hunger consumes everything. This will be my final transmission. May we meet again in whatever lies beyond. The signal dissolved into static. Elena adjusted the frequency, finding another voice. Barcelona Collective, day 47 since last feeding. Miguel and Carmen are gone. Only Isabella and myself remain. The walking dead ignore us completely. But the living, there are so few left. We found a group of survivors in the cathedral, children among them. I tried to approach, to offer protection, but they fled. They sense what we are, even if they don't understand. Perhaps it's better this way. Tomorrow we will... Static again. Elena turned the dial further. Moscow, this is Dmitri. The Winter Court has fallen. Natasha died screaming my name as the sun took her. The others scattered to the winds or chose the dawn. I am alone in a city of 10 million dead. The irony is not lost on me. We who feared discovery now exist in perfect secrecy, because there is no one left to discover us. I can feel my mind fracturing. Perhaps madness is preferable to this endless hunger. Elena switched off the radio, leaving us in heavy silence. I felt each transmission like a physical wound. Across the world, my kind were choosing extinction over this hollow mockery of existence. How many more, do you think? I asked quietly. Fewer each night. The transmission started 3 months ago. Desperate vampires reaching out, trying to maintain connection as our world collapsed. Now, Elena shrugged elegantly. Now it's mostly silence. We spent the daylight hours sharing stories of centuries past. Elena spoke of hunting through Napoleonic battlefields, of the intoxicating abundance during the Industrial Revolution, when humans crowded into cities like livestock in pens. I recounted stalking through London's fog-shrouded streets during Jack the Ripper's reign, of the peculiar satisfaction in feeding while another monster took the blame. As evening approached, Elena grew restless. She moved to the curtained windows, her hand hovering over the fabric. One more night, she murmured. One more hunt. Will you join me? I nodded. If this was to be our last evening together, I wanted to see Elena in her element, the deadly grace that had made her legendary among our kind. We descended through the building's darkened stairwells, our supernatural senses guiding us past the corpses we had created hours earlier. The night air carried familiar scents, decay, desperation, and somewhere in the distance, the warm pulse of living blood. There, Elena whispered, pointing toward a cluster of buildings 6 blocks north. Heartbeats, perhaps 20 humans. We moved through the ruins like wraiths, our footsteps silent on broken concrete and twisted metal. The infected wandered aimlessly through the streets, but paid us no attention. I had long since stopped marveling at this strange immunity. The Walking Dead simply couldn't perceive vampires as threats or food. The survivors had fortified themselves in what appeared to be an old church. Boards covered the windows, and makeshift barriers blocked the main entrance. But I could smell their fear, hear their whispered prayers in the darkness. A wedding party, Elena observed, her enhanced hearing picking up fragments of conversation. They were celebrating when it all began, been trapped here for weeks. A massive horde surrounded the building, hundreds of infected drawn by the sounds and scents of life within. The creatures pressed against the barriers, their moaning creating a symphony of hunger that echoed through the night. They won't last until dawn, I assessed. Elena's eyes gleamed with predatory anticipation. Then we give them one more night. What followed was a masterpiece of vampiric efficiency. Elena and I moved through the horde like artists wielding brushes, each motion precise and deadly. Elena's centuries of experience showed in every graceful strike, her movements resembling a deadly ballet performed among the shambling dead. I found myself watching her as much as fighting, mesmerized by the fluid way she moved between opponents. This was Elena Rosewood in her element, not the despairing creature contemplating dawn, but the apex predator who had survived 3 centuries through skill and cunning. When the last infected fell, the street was carpeted with corpses. Elena stood among them, her dark hair wild, her pale skin splattered with blackened blood. She looked more alive than she had since I found her. Listen, she whispered. From inside the church came sounds of celebration, voices raised in gratitude, prayers of thanksgiving, the laughter of children who had been spared another night of terror. The survivors would never know who had saved them, would never understand the monsters who had fought to preserve their lives. Elena's expression shifted, the predatory joy fading into something approaching sorrow. They're so beautiful when they're alive, she said softly. so vibrant. Sometimes I forget that we were like them once. Long ago, I agreed. Do you remember being human? Really remember? I considered the question. Fragments remained. Glimpses of mortality from centuries past. The weight of armor, the taste of wine, the warmth of a fire on a cold night. But they felt like memories of someone else's life. Barely, I admitted. Elena nodded sadly. I remember the fever that killed me. The burning in my veins, the certainty that I was dying. When Ambrose offered me eternity, I accepted without understanding the price. She turned to look at me directly. Would you choose differently, knowing what you know now? The question hung between us like a blade. I found myself considering not just my own transformation, but the long centuries that followed. The hunts, the kills, the endless cycle of feeding and hiding. The gradual erosion of whatever humanity I might have possessed. I don't know, I said finally. Elena smiled at my honesty. At least you're truthful. I would choose differently. Given the choice between fever death and this eternal hunger, I would choose the fever. We walked back toward the Renaissance Center in contemplative silence. The city around us continued its slow decay. Another night passing in the long death of civilization. Above us, stars wheeled through patterns that had remained constant through all of human history, indifferent to the small dramas of mortality and immortality playing out below. As we reached the building, Elena stopped and turned to face the eastern horizon. Dawn is still hours away, I observed. I know, but I want to watch it approach. I want to see the sky change, to feel the warmth building in the air. Elena's voice carried a note of anticipation that chilled me more than her earlier despair. Will you stay with me? Until the end? I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart, which had been still for centuries, but something deeper. The prospect of losing Elena felt like losing the last connection to what I had been before the world ended. Are you certain this is what you want? Elena reached out and took my hand. Her skin was cold as marble, but her grip was firm. I'm tired, Victor. Tired of pretending this existence has meaning, tired of shepherding prey I can never touch. Tired of being a ghost, haunting the edges of a dying world. We climbed to the building's roof, where Elena had apparently prepared for this moment. She had arranged a chair facing east, positioned to catch the first rays of morning sun. Beside it sat a small table, holding a single white rose, somehow preserved, probably taken from the building's executive floor. Where did you find that? I asked, indicating the flower. The executive washroom. Someone kept it in a vase by the mirror, probably never imagining it would outlive civilization. Elena picked up the rose and inhaled its fading fragrance. It seemed appropriate, beauty persisting even as everything dies. We settled into silence, waiting for the sky to begin its transformation from black to gray to gold. I found myself memorizing every detail of Elena's profile, knowing I would carry this image through whatever remained of my own existence. Will you continue? Elena asked as the first hint of gray appeared on the horizon. After I'm gone? I stared out at the dying city below, at the scattered lights marking human survivors still clinging to life in the ruins. I don't know, I said again, and realized that this uncertainty was perhaps the most honest thing I had expressed in centuries. Elena squeezed my hand as the sky began to lighten, her violet eyes reflecting the approaching dawn with something that looked remarkably like peace. Perhaps that's enough, she whispered. Perhaps not knowing is the most human thing either of us has felt in a very long time. The horizon continued to brighten, and I felt time running out like sand through my fingers, carrying away the last companion who truly understood what it meant to be a monster in a world that no longer had room for monsters. The sky transformed with agonizing beauty as dawn approached. I watched the horizon shift from deep purple to soft gray, each subtle change marking another step toward Elena's chosen end. She sat motionless in her chair, the white rose cradled in her pale hands, her violet eyes fixed on the eastern skyline with serene determination. Tell me about your first kill, Elena said suddenly, her voice cutting through the pre-dawn silence. My memory drifted back across centuries. A merchant's son in Bucharest. 1398. I was barely 3 months turned, still clumsy with bloodlust. He fought back, nearly escaped. I paused, remembering the terror in the young man's eyes. I felt guilt then. It faded with time. Mine was a priest, Elena confessed. 2 weeks after Ambrose created me. The irony appealed to my maker. Corruption of the sacred. I wept afterward, thinking I was damned. She turned the rose between her fingers. Now I realized damnation was never about our victims. It was about forgetting we had once been human ourselves. The gray light grew stronger, and I could feel the approaching warmth even through the cool night air. My supernatural senses screamed warnings about the coming danger. Instincts honed over 6 centuries demanding retreat to shelter and shadow. But Elena remained perfectly still, as if the approaching sun held no terror for her. "I need to tell you something," I said, desperation creeping into my voice, "about why I continue this futile protection of the humans." Elena's gaze shifted to me, curious but calm. "It's not nobility. It's not even pragmatism anymore." My words came in a rush. "It's because stopping would mean accepting that our entire existence was meaningless. That 600 years of hunting, killing, surviving, that it all led to nothing but slow starvation in a dead world." "And what if it was meaningless?" Elena asked gently. "What if we were always nothing more than parasites, and now the host is dying?" I had no answer because the question struck too close to fears I had harbored for decades. Had our kind ever been anything more than elegant predators? Had our survival contributed anything to the world beyond our own continued existence? The horizon began to blush with the first hints of rose and gold. Elena stood and moved to the very edge of the rooftop, where nothing would obstruct the sun's rays. My every instinct shrieked at me to pull her back, to drag her to safety, but I remained frozen in my chair. "Elena, please, don't," she said firmly, not turning around. "This is my choice, Victor. The first truly free choice I've made in 3 centuries. Don't steal it from me with false hope or empty persuasion." She set the white rose on the roof's ledge, where the morning breeze caught its petals and scattered them into the abyss below. The symbolism was clear: beauty falling into darkness, grace surrendering to inevitability. "Will you watch?" Elena asked. "I don't want to be alone when it happens." I rose from my chair and moved to stand behind her, close enough to offer comfort, but far enough to remain in shadow. "I'll watch." The sun crested the horizon like a golden blade, its first rays stretching across the ruined city. The light touched abandoned skyscrapers and collapsed bridges, illuminating a world that had once teemed with human life and now hosted only the shambling remnants of the infected. Elena closed her eyes as the warmth reached her face. "It's beautiful," she whispered. I had forgotten how beautiful sunrise could be. The light grew stronger, and I saw the first wisps of smoke beginning to rise from Elena's exposed skin. She didn't flinch, didn't cry out, but tears ran down her cheeks as her flesh began to smolder. "Elena." "Shh." Her voice remained steady despite the pain. "Let me have this moment." The sun climbed higher, its rays growing more intense. Elena's skin began to glow with an inner fire, her form becoming translucent as the ancient vampiric flesh surrendered to the light it had avoided for centuries. She looked more beautiful than ever, a creature of shadow and death, transforming into something luminous and eternal. "Tell me," she gasped as the burning intensified. "Tell me you'll remember me as more than a monster." "You were never a monster," I said, my voice breaking with an emotion I thought I had lost long ago. "You were magnificent." Elena smiled as her form began to dissolve, her centuries-old body finally releasing its hold on immortal existence. "Thank you," she whispered. And then the morning breeze scattered her ashes across the dead city below. I stood alone on the rooftop, staring at the empty space where Elena had been. The white rose petals danced in the wind, the only remaining evidence that she had ever existed. Below me, the city stretched in all directions, a vast necropolis where the few remaining humans struggled against inevitable extinction. For the first time in my long existence, I understood true solitude. The following nights blurred together in a haze of mechanical routine. I continued my patrols, clearing infected from around human settlements, protecting survivors who would never know my name or understand my sacrifice. But the purpose that had sustained me was dying along with my species. I intercepted no more radio transmissions. The vampiric communication networks had fallen silent, leaving only static where once voices had called across the darkness. I was, as far as I could determine, the last of my kind on a planet where my kind no longer had a place. Without Elena's presence, the weight of absolute solitude pressed down on me like a physical force. 6 centuries of existence had never prepared me for this level of isolation. Even during my darkest periods, there had always been the knowledge that others of my kind existed somewhere in the world's shadows. Now that comfort was gone, leaving me as the sole curator of secrets that would die with me. 3 weeks after Elena's death, I encountered a group of survivors trapped in a shopping mall. They had barricaded themselves inside while hundreds of infected pressed against the entrances. It should have been a simple rescue. Eliminate the threat, preserve the livestock, maintain the cycle. Instead, I found myself standing motionless in the parking lot, watching the infected claw at glass doors, while human screams echoed from within. For the first time in centuries, I felt no compulsion to act. The survivors were just meat. Their deaths would change nothing. Their survival would change nothing. A woman's voice cut through the cacophony. Not screaming, but singing. A lullaby, soft and tremulous, trying to comfort someone in the darkness. The melody was familiar, something from the 18th century that I remembered hearing in Elena's voice during our final night together. The coincidence struck me like a physical blow, but as I turned to leave, a child's cry cut through the night, pure terror distilled into sound. My dead heart stirred with something that might have been conscience, and I found myself moving toward the mall despite my apathy. The slaughter that followed was efficient but joyless. I tore through the infected with mechanical precision, my claws finding skulls and spines with practiced ease. Each kill felt hollow, devoid of the predatory satisfaction that had once driven me. I was a machine now, programmed for destruction but lacking any real purpose beyond the execution of my function. When silence returned to the mall, I could hear the survivors celebrating inside. Another night survived, another small victory against the dying of the light. The woman had resumed her lullaby, and I found myself lingering in the shadows, listening to the achingly human melody that reminded me of everything I had lost. I left without revealing myself, but the child's cry and the woman's song haunted me through the remaining hours until dawn. They represented something I could no longer be part of, the simple, desperate hope of mortals clinging to life in the face of extinction. 2 months passed in this torturous routine. The human settlements grew smaller and more scattered as resources dwindled and the infected multiplied. My own condition deteriorated as the hunger grew unbearable. I had attempted to feed on the infected once, driven by desperation, but their tainted blood had brought only nausea and weakness that lasted for days. The deterioration was not merely physical. I found my enhanced senses dulling, my supernatural strength waning. Centuries of accumulated power were bleeding away like water through a broken vessel. Some nights I struggled to hear heartbeats from more than a few blocks away. Other nights, my vision failed me in ways that would have been impossible during my prime. I began visiting the places where Elena and I had hunted together, seeking some echo of her presence in the ruins. The church where we had saved the wedding party now stood empty, its survivors long since moved on or claimed by the growing darkness. The pharmacy where I had first demonstrated my abilities to protect the humans remained barricaded, but no heartbeats echoed from within. One evening, while clearing infected from around a small farmhouse where 6 humans had barricaded themselves, I caught sight of my reflection in a broken window. The creature staring back was gaunt, hollow-eyed, more specter than predator. My elegant features had become skull-like, my pale skin stretched tight over sharp bones. My once immaculate hair hung lank and lifeless, and my eyes, those eyes that had mesmerized countless victims across the centuries, now held only emptiness. I looked like death itself, which, I realized, was exactly what I had become. The farmers inside the house would survive another night because of my intervention. They would wake with the dawn, tend their small garden, care for their children, and never know that a monster had fought to preserve their small pocket of humanity. I could hear them through the walls. A man reading aloud from what sounded like scripture. A woman humming the same lullaby I had heard at the mall. Children asking when they could go outside and play again. Their innocence was devastating. They still believed in tomorrow, in the possibility of return to normalcy. They planned for harvest seasons that would never come, discussed futures that would never unfold. I envied them their delusions, even as I protected them. For what purpose? So they could starve when winter came? So they could fall to the next horde or the one after that? I was postponing the inevitable, not preventing it. Every night of survival I granted them was merely another day of prolonged suffering in a world that no longer supported human civilization. The realization settled over me like a shroud. I was not their protector. I was their undertaker, extending their torment out of my own inability to accept the end. That night, I made my way back to the Renaissance Center and climbed to the rooftop where Elena had chosen her end. The city spread below me in all directions, a monument to human ambition now serving as a mausoleum for their civilization. Streetlights flickered sporadically, powered by failing generators and solar panels. In the distance, fires burned where groups of survivors huddled together for warmth and the illusion of safety. I settled into the chair Elena had used, facing east toward the horizon where dawn would soon break. The hunger gnawed at me like acid, but I felt oddly peaceful for the first time in months. The torment of indecision was ending. I reached into my coat and withdrew something I had carried for weeks. Elena's white rose, or rather its desiccated remains. I had gathered the scattered petals after her death, pressed them carefully between pages of an abandoned book. They crumbled at my touch now, but their faint fragrance remained, a ghost of beauty in a world that had forgotten such things. The wind carried scents from across the dying city, smoke from the survivors' fires, the omnipresent stench of decay, the metallic tang of blood both fresh and old. But underneath it all, I detected something else, the clean smell of rain approaching. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, promising to wash the streets clean once more, as they had done countless times before humanity's reign and would continue long after. I thought of Elena's final moments, her serene acceptance of the sun's embrace. I thought of Lord Blackthorn, choosing starvation over continued suffering. I thought of all the voices on the radio transmissions, vampires across the world who had reached the same inevitable conclusion. The Moscow vampire, Dmitri, whose mind had been fracturing under the weight of isolation. The Barcelona collective, choosing to die together rather than face extinction alone. The London coven, each member taking their turn to greet the dawn. They had all understood what I was only now accepting, that some endings were more dignified than others. Perhaps they had been right all along. Perhaps survival without purpose was worse than honorable extinction. Perhaps clinging to existence when existence had lost all meaning was the greatest cowardice of all. I closed my eyes and waited for the sky to begin its transformation. I would not open them again until the sun's first rays touched my face. The storm arrived before dawn, bringing sheets of rain that drummed against the rooftop with increasing intensity. I remained motionless in my chair, allowing the water to soak through my clothes and run down my pale skin. The rain was cold and clean, washing away the accumulated grime of months spent hunting through the ruins. Lightning illuminated the sky in brilliant flashes, each one revealing the vast necropolis that Detroit had become. Thunder rolled across the landscape, drowning out the distant moans of the infected and the whispered prayers of the survivors. For a few minutes, the storm made me feel almost alive again, connected to the primal forces that had shaped the world long before vampires or humans had walked upon it. As the rain lessened and the storm moved east, the horizon remained dark for what felt like hours, though I knew it was only minutes. Time moved differently when one was waiting for extinction. Every second stretched into eternity, every heartbeat of silence marking another step toward the end. Finally, despite the lingering clouds, the eastern sky began to lighten with the approach of dawn. I opened my eyes and saw the familiar progression from black to gray, to the first hints of rose and gold painting the storm-washed sky. The beauty was overwhelming. No wonder humans had worshipped the sun throughout their history. It represented everything vampires could never possess: warmth, life, renewal, hope. The clouds that had brought the storm were breaking apart, allowing shafts of divine light to spear through the gaps. The city below gleamed wetly in the growing illumination, almost beautiful in its desolation. Steam rose from rain-soaked streets, creating an ethereal mist that softened the harsh edges of destruction. I thought of my first sunrise as a vampire, the terror of realizing I could never again witness this daily miracle without facing extinction. I had learned to love the night, to find beauty in shadows and starlight, but some part of me had always mourned the loss of dawn's gentle radiance. Now, after 6 centuries of darkness, I would finally reclaim this stolen wonder. The sun crested the horizon, its rays stretching across the dead city like fingers of liquid fire. I felt the warmth touch my face and smiled for the first time since Elena's death. There was no fear, only a profound sense of coming home after an impossibly long journey. The light grew stronger, and my skin began to smoke. The pain was exquisite. Not the agony I had expected, but something almost like relief. My immortal flesh was finally surrendering its impossible grip on existence, releasing me from centuries of predation and hunger. As my vision began to blur, I thought I saw a figure standing beside me. Elena, whole and beautiful. Her violet eyes bright with welcome. Whether it was hallucination or something more, I found comfort in the image. Behind her, other shapes materialized in the golden light. Lord Blackthorn with his ancient dignity intact, the voices from the radio transmissions made manifest, all the vampires who had chosen this same end. "Are you ready?" Elena seemed to ask, her voice carrying the musical quality I remembered from our nights together. I tried to speak but found my throat had already begun to dissolve. Instead, I nodded as my form continued to burn in the growing light. The pain was transcendent now, transforming from mere physical sensation into something approaching spiritual catharsis. Below me, the city continued its slow death, its few remaining human inhabitants unaware that the last guardian had joined his kind in extinction. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the woman's lullaby again, carried on the morning breeze, a final connection to the humanity I had both protected and preyed upon. My last coherent thought was not of regret or loss, but of profound relief. The hunger was ending. The solitude was ending. The long, impossible vigil was finally over. I had been a monster for 6 centuries, but perhaps in these final months, I had discovered something approaching redemption. The morning breeze scattered my ashes across the dead city, and the world belonged entirely to humans once more, for whatever time remained to them. In the Renaissance Center far below, 6 humans huddled around a small fire, unaware that their mysterious protector had chosen to greet his final sunrise. They would survive a few more days, perhaps a few more weeks, before the growing horde found them. But that was a story for the living to write. The age of vampires had ended with the dawn, and I, Victor Drake, last of my ancient kind, had found peace in the light that had been denied to me for so long. The sun climbed higher into the morning sky, its rays touching everything with golden benediction, indifferent to the small tragedy that had just concluded on a rooftop in a dying city. In the end, the light claimed everything.